Welcome to the Orthodontics in Summary podcast, where Farooq brings you the key points and understanding of orthodontic webinars, conferences, and papers in a concise podcast with your host, Farooq Ahmed.
Welcome to this episode of Orthodontics in Summary. Today's lecture is the third in our series by Dalia El Bokle entitled Bonding for an Exquisite Finish, and this is the third part. This will focus on looking at digital indirect bonding. This was delivered by Dalia El Bokle as well as by her technician, who is George Antonopoulos. So Dalia started off by describing straight wire appliances. The premise that we can get the bracket into ideal position and have the tooth in an ideal location in 3 planes of space is not true, and that's evidenced by the use of finishing bends. The ideals of bracket positioning remain the same. Posteriorly, we want to level our marginal ridges, and anteriorly, we want to achieve a consonant smile. So when it comes to indirect bonding, in a digital sense, we can choose a variety of brackets, those which are standardized and those that we can customize. And customized are brackets, for example, insignia brackets, or the bracket base itself can be customized. When it comes to looking at the digital bonding technique, there are only a few studies available. A study by Layman in 2019 showed that the digital aspect of indirect bonding saves 21 minutes compared to the manual direct bonding technique. When it comes to the clinical side, we're saving at least 8 minutes when it comes to clinical delivery. We know that there's reproducibility with digital indirect bonding. That was Dorat in 2020. Dalia went on to describe 5 different methods for creating digital indirect bonding techniques. Now, I'm going to focus on 3 of those methods, which were the most varied. The first is the simplest. This is where a model is printed, a transfer tray is created, and the brackets are inserted into the tray. This is the simplest of all the techniques, and it involves a clean base technique. Essentially, the base of the bracket isn't changed or altered. The second method is one where there is no tray printed. There is a transfer tray printed directly. Now, the cost is quite high at around $105. The tray is biocompatible and essentially uncovers the occlusal half of the teeth. And the advantage of this is that there's no models printed, and again it involves a clean base technique. The bracket base isn't modified. The third method, and this is Dalia's preferred method, and what the lecture focused on was that involving key pads. So how does this process work? Well, this is where we have a model, and on the model itself, where the bracket is to be positioned, there is an addition of material. This is the concept of key pads. Now, this will translate itself to a composite material on it, and we're now customizing the bracket base. What are the advantages of this? Well, we can truly customize each individual bracket, and it's relatively straightforward and cost-effective to achieve. Later on, George described the technical sides as how this can be achieved. Dalia then mentioned how to submit a case for digital indirect bonding. Starts off with an STL file through scanning or through impressions, and then instructions to the laboratory for the case setup. Your clinician then gets the approval for the setup and can make modifications to the process. So, to submit the prescription, the clinician needs to ensure they are being very clear, and Dalia went through a step-by-step process, stating which brackets are to be used. For example, standard Layman brackets, low torque on the lower incisors, and then the customization to it. For example, low torque on the lower left 4. Specifying which teeth, 7 to 7, both upper and lower arches. Then also looking at the bracket positioning. So if we want to carry out changes with respect to the smile arc, specifying, for example, 0.5 mm lower for the central incisor relative to the lateral incisor. Then this information goes to the laboratory. So what does George do with this information? Well, George described it as the CADCAM approach. That's computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing of the indirect bonding technique. The lab will then use software to take from a bracket library and position it according to the prescription. This then gets sent to the clinician for changes and modification. And with this process, each individual tooth can be customized in those 3 planes of space. And this happens through the use of keypads. So this is where digitally there's an excess of material planned in between the bracket base and the tooth surface itself, which allows customization in 3 planes of space. So the next stage is to create a jig, and what a jig allows to happen is for the brackets to be placed on the models themselves in an ideal position. Now, the attachment of the bracket onto the model is used through composite, so this is now when the bracket base is being customized. Once that's been placed onto the models, then the indirect bonding tray is made. Can be created through a thermoforming process or through the use of a silicon transfer tray. George recommends the use of Memosil as a material of choice for the silicon transfer tray. Then post-processing takes place through chemicals, UV light, and finally a water bath. And then the indirect bonding tray is ready to go. What I liked about this lecture was that both Dalia and George were honest about the learning curve associated with this process. They speak about the merits, how it reduces their clinical time, less repositions of teeth, less finishing bends, but also it took an amount of money to achieve these changes and also a willingness to learn and understand the process. Like any new technique, it will have its nuances. It was a great lecture by one of the speakers who is very quickly becoming one of my favourites. I look forward to seeing hopefully a publication coming out on the same topic to give further information and details of how we can achieve it. That's it guys, I'm taking a break over the next week whilst I cover the British Orthodontic Conference happening at the end of the next week. Hope you guys are going to tune in to that either virtually or in person, and of course the podcast will follow after the conference.